Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the story of William Waddell and the murder of Jane Beadmoore, also known as Savage, in Birtley in 1888. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this story, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. William Waddell was born in around 1867 in Durham to parents Edward and Euphemia, and he was one of 7 children. His name is spelt differently in many articles. It could be Waddell or Waddle, but I will stick with Waddle for the purpose of this story. The family had originated in Scotland but had moved to the Durham area around the time of William's birth. In 1881 he was said to be working as an agricultural labourer, and this still appears to be his occupation in 1888. It was said that William was prone to drinking rather a lot. Jane Beadmoore, the victim, had been born in around 1861 in Walker to parents Joseph and Isabella. She had at least one brother called William. The family had later moved to the Birtley area. There are no details that say that she had been married, but her name had clearly changed from Savage to Beardmore by 1881, but she is listed in the census at the time as unmarried, and some news reports still use the name Savage when they are talking about her. She was described as being a popular girl but was often in ill health. At the time of the crime, it was said that she was living in a place called Northside in Birtley with her mother and stepfather. I have found no details of any occupation for Jane. Early on the Sunday morning of September the 23rd, 1888, a body of a young woman was found on Birtley Fell in Durham. She had been found by a man by the name of John Fish, who had been on his way to work. He had been terribly shocked at what he had seen and immediately sent for the police. When they arrived, they found that the poor girl had been dead for some time. She had been stabbed several times, and she had also been badly mutilated in a way that was similar to the recent murders that had taken place in Whitechapel in London. The body was later identified as that of Jane Beadmoore, who had not been seen by her family since Saturday night. It was thought that the crime had been committed using a sharp knife or similar instrument, but it had not been found. The police were carrying out a search in the hope of finding it in the area where the body was found. The newspapers of the time were full of stories of the Whitechapel murders. These would later become known as the Jack the Ripper murders. It was thought at the time that Jane may have been a victim of the same murderer, and that he had possibly left London and headed to the northeast. Because of the similarities to the Ripper murders, Dr. Phillips, who had performed the post-mortem on one of the victims, and Inspector Roots of Scotland Yard had travelled to the area to view the body of poor Jane Beadmoore. Both had decided that this was just someone copying what they had probably read in the newspapers at the time, and that it was not a crime committed by the man from London. They were convinced enough to head quickly back to London, leaving the local police to deal with the murder. Witnesses who had seen Jane on the Saturday before her death suggested that she had been in the company of a young man by the name of William Waddell. The pair had been going out together for some time, but it seems that Jane had become unhappy with William's drinking habits, and it was suggested by many that Jane had told William that she no longer wished to see him, and that he had not been happy about this. It had made him very upset, and he had been drinking even more than usual. One witness said when they had seen the couple together on Saturday night, William had appeared to be very drunk and was behaving in a somewhat excitable manner. The police very quickly decided that William was the man they wanted. However, he had already fled from the area. The fact that he had disappeared made many people feel that he must be guilty. It was thought that William may have headed towards Scotland. He had possibly been seen once or twice in this area, but the police did not think that he would have travelled that far on foot. However, he was finally found in a little village near Kelso, and he was quickly arrested on suspicion of the murder of Jane Beadmoore and was brought back to Gateshead by train. It was said in some reports that people lined the route in the hope of catching a glimpse of the Birtley murderer, as he was now known. After fleeing from the area, William had sold his clothes at Berwick to a second-hand clothing dealer, and an appeal had been made for the return of the clothes he had originally been wearing, and luckily they were found. The police believed that they appeared to have bloodstains on them, and they also believed that this was the reason that he had tried to get rid of them. At the time of his arrest, he was described as being around 5 feet 9 inches tall. He apparently had trouble walking and tended to lean forward. They even went as far as to say that he had bad feet. This was no doubt down to the amount of walking he had done since fleeing from Birtley after the murder. They said that he appeared feeble-looking, but that he was actually a lot stronger than he looked. On his arrival back at Birtley, he was officially charged with the murder of Jane Beadmoore. The inquest was held at the 3 Tons Inn at Birtley, and the coroner was Mr. Graham. Elizabeth Brodie of Berwick said she was a second-hand clothes dealer, and she had bought a suit of clothing from William, and she had given him an old suit in exchange. She said that she had not noticed any bloodstains on the clothing that she had bought. Daniel McCormick said William lodged with his mother, and that he had seen him recently mending a pair of shoes using a sharp-pointed knife. A sharp-pointed knife was still believed to be the murder weapon. George Taylor of Corbridge said he had seen a man fitting William's description on Saturday, September the 23rd, in the area where he lived. He said that he looked tired and dirty, as if he had not been home all night. William Stock said he had examined the clothing that had belonged to William. He said the tests done on the stains had revealed them to be human blood, but it did appear that these stains had been diluted with water at some point. He explained, when asked, that it was almost impossible to tell how old those bloodstains were. P.C. Thompson said that when he arrested William, he denied knowing anyone by the name of Jane Beadmoore, but said that he knew a Jane Savage and that she was his wife. He claimed that he had left her on Birtley Fell on Saturday night. P.C. Thompson had asked him if she had been alive when he left her, and William had replied, "No, she was dead." I did not find any evidence that Jane and William had ever been married. The jury retired for nearly 2.5 hours. It seems they did not fully find William guilty of the crime, and they returned an open verdict. However, this did not mean that William was free to leave. He would still have to stand trial. It was felt that there would be more evidence by the time of the trial to prove his guilt. Jane's funeral took place on Wednesday, September the 22nd at Birtley Parish Church. It was a very sad scene. For miles around, the people of the area had come to line the streets to pay their respects as the coffin of the poor girl and her family passed them by. The procession was nearly half a mile long. The coffin bore the simple inscription, "Jane Beadmoore died September the 22nd, 1888. The Reverend Arthur Watts performed the service both in the church and at the graveside. The trial of William Waddell took place in Durham on November the 29th, 1888. William was asked how he pleaded, and he replied, "Not guilty." Some newspapers of the time described him as not looking like the kind of man who could have committed such a terrible crime, and it was also said that he looked much better now than what he had done at the time of his arrest. Jane and William were described by many as having been sweethearts. They had been seen together many times in the area, and most said they appeared to be happy together until recently. It was stated that on the night of the crime, Jane had been to Gateshead to collect some medication. She had returned to Birtley and had visited a public house where it was said that she had drank some lemonade. She was intending to head home after this. It was here that William had often met her in the past, and it was here that he met her that night. Witnesses said that he was already very drunk when he had arrived. He had not been there long when Jane got up to leave and William followed her out. Those who saw her leave did not seem to think that she had arranged to meet him there that night, or that she had wanted him to follow her outside. An unnamed man who did not live in the area said he had seen a couple near the wagonway. As he approached them, the man moved to one side. The witness was able to give a very good description of the man and woman, and the prosecution were in no doubt that the man seen with Jane had indeed been William Waddell. Several other witnesses gave evidence to say they had seen the couple together that night. However, no one had seen them at the location of the crime. The area was described as a very lonely place, and that people did not usually go there unless using the pathway to travel to and from work. It was described as being the ideal place to commit a crime without being seen. P.C. Thompson had testified at the inquest that William had said she was dead when he left Jane on the fell, and now P.C. Syke would say that William had told him that he must have been out of his senses to do such a thing. This seemed to suggest that although he had not been seen at the location, he had confessed to some extent to being the person who had attacked and killed Jane. William's defence team did not call any witnesses or ask him to testify, but they did speak to the jury to say that they felt that all the evidence against him was purely circumstantial. It had not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that William had indeed committed this most dreadful crime. No one had seen him leave the fell, and no one had seen the couple after the last witness had passed them both beside the wagonway. However, the jury took less than half an hour to return a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against William Waddell. The judge then sentenced him to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the grounds of Durham Prison. He said that due to the violent and brutal nature of the crime, he felt that there would be no reason to think a reprieve would be granted, despite William's young age. William was then led from the dock and returned to Durham Prison. There was indeed no reprieve for William, and the execution was set for Tuesday, December the 18th, 1888. I was unable to find any details of anyone visiting William during his time in prison, but his family would have been allowed to visit him if they and he had wished to do so. The day before the execution, William asked to speak to the Dean of Durham. It was to him that he confessed to the crime. It was said that he tearfully said that he had been out of his mind with drink, angry at being rejected, and that he must have been deranged by reading the accounts of the Whitechapel Murders in London. He claimed that when he realised that Jane was dead, he decided to copy the Whitechapel Murders. He became so upset at this point that nothing more of what he said could be understood. It has to be assumed that he copied the London crime with the hope of escaping the gallows, as the police he hoped would be looking for the London killer and not him. But his plan had not worked. Anyone who knew the cases in Whitechapel knew that this crime had been committed by a different hand. The night before the execution, William was said to have slept well, awaking at 5:30 a.m. and dressing in the same suit he had worn for his trial. He then ate a small breakfast and afterwards was attended by the prison chaplain. James Berry was the executioner, and he arrived at the cell of William just before 8 a.m. and escorted him with 2 warders to the press room, where only 4 reporters were present. William was then pinioned, which means that his arms were tied at the wrists, and he was led to the scaffold. He was said to show some signs of anguish. He did appear to reach out for the arm of one of the warders at one point, but quickly composed himself and then walked on calmly and firmly without the need of any help. He also walked onto the drop without any help. The rope was then adjusted and the white hood placed over his face. Berry gave the signal and the bolt was removed and William fell. His death was said to be instant. Only around 100 people were outside of the prison to see the black flag flown to confirm the sentence had been carried out as required by law. It was suggested that the bad weather had stopped the usual crowds from gathering, as the case had generated much interest and many more had been expected. James Berry was known to dislike reporters, and it was said that after the execution that the reporters had been placed in an area that meant they saw little or nothing after William had walked towards the scaffold, and they had been asked to leave almost immediately after the bolt had been drawn. After the usual time of 1 hour, William's body was removed and placed in a plain coffin. He was later buried in the exercise yard at Durham Prison, and the ground would be later rolled so that little or no sign would be seen of where his body had been placed. There was little doubt that William had been responsible for the murder of Jane Beadmoore. After all, he had even confessed to the crime. But rumours still existed that she had really been a victim of Jack the Ripper for many years afterwards. There was never any proof that it had been Jack, but there had been proof that it had been William. I hope you have found this sad and tragic story interesting. The murder itself was one so bad that describing the injuries in detail was not something I wished to do. William, although it was said he was not suffering from insanity, must have truly lost his mind to murder the woman he cared for so much in such a gruesome way. The motive being nothing more than a spurned lover who reacted badly when he was rejected. The lives of two so young sadly lost in a moment of madness, and the families of both left devastated at the loss of their loved ones. Thank you all very much for watching, and do please forgive my mistakes. As I have said before, I do record this all in one take. I do hope to see you all again very soon.